Alrighty, so let's do 5.2 and 5.3. I'm going to do them pretty quickly in the textbook instead of having slides. Well, maybe I'll use these slides. Oops. For writing the constructor. Okay, so we are going to do writing the constructor next, and then 5.3 is just like commenting and stuff. So I'm going to do both and then give you work time. So we've seen a few constructors now. When we were doing turtle graphics, we created a new world. We created a new turtle. We saw that you can have two different kinds of constructors for the same class. So we had a turtle that just took the world, and we had a turtle that took a world and a location. And we saw the same thing with the car class, where you could either create a car and it defaulted to minivan if you didn't pass anything in, or you could pass it in a different type of car and it would set the type to whatever you passed in instead of minivan. So we need to know how to write constructors that either set initial values and or have different options depending on what you want to do. So usually we write the constructor immediately after the variables or the properties of the object, but before all the other methods. So you can kind of think of it as like it's the most important method because it constructs the object, which you need to do before you can do anything with an object. So even though Java doesn't care, just from like a readability point of view, just put the constructor at the beginning of all of your methods because that's where people expect it to be. And just like we did with a person, you can have parameters that you're sending in to the constructor because a lot of the time it doesn't make sense to make an object without certain sort of initialization, right? It doesn't make sense to have a person with no name. It doesn't make sense to have a car without a type, right? So in the constructor itself, right, you want to set the type or you want to set the person's name. And so usually you want the user to pass in something like a riddle doesn't make sense without a question and an answer. So you have to pass those in when you create a new riddle. So, excuse me. Here is a way to create a person with no name, email, or phone number. So typically you wouldn't want to do this, but it's possible, right? Typically you'd want to be able to pass in a name, an email, and a phone number. But you can actually have both. In Java, you can have multiple versions of the same method as long as they take different arguments or different parameters. So you can have literally the same method name, person and person. They're both constructors. They both work fine. And in the background, Java will figure out which one to use depending on whether you create your person object with a name, an email, and a phone number, or if you leave all of those out, it will use the default one and set the name, email, and phone number to blank, to nothing, empty strings. So this is perfectly valid, and that works for any method, right? You could write an average method that takes 2 parameters, 3 parameters, 4 parameters, 5, 6, and have like 10 different average methods that are all called average. But as long as they take a different number of parameters, Java will just automatically use the right one depending on what you pass into it. So you're going to do this practice in a minute, but basically, this is just the practice from 5.2.1, so I'm going to skip it for now. So think in your mind, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to read this and see if you can answer the question. This is like a popular multiple choice type of question on the exam. So take 30 seconds and read it, and then I'll ask for your answers. So don't type anything in yet. All right, so in the chat, go ahead and type your answer, A, B, C, or D. Okay, we got a lot of D's in 1A. I was thinking about A as well. And while that's kind of true, what we're really doing is initializing the instance variables in the object, right? That's the purpose of it, is to set the instance variables. That's what we've been doing. So we have our instance variables, and the constructor is supposed to do something with those instance variables, so that you can use them later on in your methods. So this is, even though A is mostly true, D is the best answer, because that's what we're spending most of our time doing. Okay, let me get to over here. So there's the person constructor again. And yeah, most of 5.2 is just exercises in practice. So like here's a cat class. Here's the constructor. Why can I not type on this? So the cat class has some private attributes here. The name, an integer age, and a Boolean is a senior or not. And then it only has one constructor. It takes the name and the age. And if the age is greater than 10, it sets the other property is senior equal to true. So here is a version of the cat class that has 2 constructors, and that's called overloading. So depending on whether you pass in the name, the age, and the number of kittens, or just the name and the age, it will pick whichever one is correct. So I'm guessing which one, saying which one can be used to create a cat that's 5 years old and no kittens. So go ahead and see if you can figure out, of this 1, 2, or 3, which ones will create a new cat object that is 5 years old and has no kittens. I'll give you 30 seconds to try and figure it out. All right, so go ahead and type in the chat A, B, C, D, or E. Okay, so pretty much everybody picked D, which is great. So number 1, new cat with the name Sprinkles, 5 and 0. So Java will automatically pick this first one because it has a string, an integer, and integer. The string name is Sprinkles, the age is 5, kittens is 0. So that one works. Number 2, Lucy05 will have an age of 0 and a kittens of 5. So that would be a really strange cat and does not meet our requirements. So 2 doesn't work. Number 3 would automatically call the overloaded constructor, the second constructor, because it only has 2 parameters, the string Luna and the age 5, and it automatically sets kittens to 0. So 1 and 3 work, and the answer is D. Awesome. I feel like you guys are getting this pretty well. Where is it? All right, so the other thing I want to talk about are comments and conditions. So there are 3 ways to write comments in Java. And the purpose of comments is to explain things that are not already clear. So you don't generally need to put comments on every single line. You just need to do it in specific places or where things aren't clear. Whoa, what just happened? Okay. So if you just want to have a quick comment on one line, you put these 2 forward slashes. If you want to have multiple lines, you can put a /* at the beginning, and everything will be a comment until you do */ to end it. So if, for example, you have some code that's not working and you're not sure why, like you can just put a /* at the beginning and a */ at the end, and it will just effectively not even see that code. The /** means it's beginning a Java doc, and that is used in like advanced stuff. We're not really gonna, I'm not gonna worry about that. It's not on the AP exam, and you wouldn't use that except in a professional environment. So generally you put it in front of your classes and methods as explanations for what they do, because there's automatic scrapers that will put that in a documentation file for you. So we're mostly going to use just the first two kinds. So here's an example. You can see the /**. So that is how you would write a Java doc for your class. But what we will do more of is where you see this keeps track of the max score with the 2 forward slashes. That means that that is there for programmers to read, and the Java compiler will completely ignore it. Same with the print method, prints out the max. So these aren't comments you would actually put in, because you can tell what the print method does by looking at it. They're just using this as an example of what you would do in like a more complicated method. You would explain what it does before writing it all out. Like if it was like 100 or 200 lines of code, you would want some kind of explanation to tell you what it's doing. This you do need to know for the exam. So preconditions mean these things will always be true before you even get into your method. So on the AP exam, they'll say, for example, the precondition for the turtle is that X and Y are integers that are within the range 0 to the proper width and height of the world. And the reason they tell you that is because when you're a professional programmer, you need to check that, right? You need to make sure that somebody doesn't put a turtle at -5 billion, comma, negative pi, right? But for our purposes, they can just say, you can assume that X and Y are between 0 and the width and the height of the world. They're telling you, don't worry about the error checking. So preconditions are really useful, especially in things like tests where they're just telling you, don't worry about error checking, assume that the input is valid. Okay. And that way you just can do your algorithm and do it properly without having to worry about, what the user is doing. Post conditions are a little bit different in that this is what your algorithm has to produce. So if you have a method called square, then your post condition would be a positive integer from 0 to max int, which means if they pass in something, you have to return some kind of integer from 0 to max int. So it's telling you what it expects to get back, or what it expects the purpose of this function to accomplish. So in this example on the screen, right, it puts a turtle on the screen. That is the post condition at the X and Y coordinates. So you have to make sure your code if they pass in the proper parameters according to the preconditions, your function has to produce the post condition. So that's what precondition and post condition mean. What is guaranteed to be the input and what is guaranteed to be the output, basically. And that way, other programmers using your code know what to do, and also what you need to do on the exam. So there are some challenges here. The turtle to try and break it so that it, you know, it meets the preconditions, but it doesn't work the way you expect it to do. So that's just a way of kind of reinforcing your knowledge. Here's another question for you. Look at this class definition. Which of the following preconditions are reasonable for the test score constructor? So again, don't type it in yet. I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to think about it. And then I'm going to ask you to type in your answer into the chat. What is a reasonable precondition for the test score constructor? So you can choose more than one. It doesn't have to be just one. I think on the AP test, they would number these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then do that thing where it's like 1 only, 1 and 3, 1, 2, and 4. So you can pick more than just one if you want to of A, B, C, D, and E. All right, go ahead and enter your answer in the chat. Excellent. We got lots of different answers. And their trick question, I think, tricked some of you. At least no one has picked A, so I'm happy about that. So we definitely do not want the score to be less than 0, right? I mean, I've had some bad students in my life, but I've never given anyone a negative score. B says the score needs to be greater than or equal to 0. And while that's true, that is not a precondition for the constructor. The constructor takes the variables n, s, and ec. So B doesn't actually work because the constructor doesn't take score as an input. It takes S as an input. So C is correct. S and EC both should be greater than or equal to 0. And D is correct because we don't want a blank name, right? We want to be able to identify whose score and extra credit this is. But student name, again, the property or the attribute of test score is not a precondition of the constructor. N can be a precondition of the constructor, but not student name. So the answer is C and D. So C and D are the correct answers. All right, one more question here. Actually, I want to do a, they didn't have a post condition. All right, well, now you know the answer. So this is kind of a backwards or a hard to read one. All it's saying is that the following method is intended to return the substring starting at I until the end of the string. So you pass it a string and then essentially return the substring at the position. So a reasonable precondition is that I is greater than or equal to 0 and less than the length of the string. So that's it for 5.2 and 5.3. Let's see if there's anything else here in 5.3. Not really. I think 5.2 and 5.3 you'll get through pretty quickly. So I'm basically going to just give you the rest of today to work on that. If you would like to go back into the breakout rooms to do it, just type Y in the chat. If you would not like to go back in the breakout rooms, type N. Yes, you can leave if you type N. Shocking. Well, Grant, I like your style, but unfortunately you are in the minority here. So I will let you finish up on your own. You may 5.1 through 5.3 is due on Friday. Any questions? Here, hold on. Let me close all the breakout rooms.